But the most important thing of all is just to say how pleased I am to have been given this role. So thank you very much indeed. I've been long a champion of local councils, but also particularly of rural communities, including the market towns that service them. And whilst that is not the totality of those represented here today, it is a particular interest of mine, and obviously goes to the roots of very many parish councils around the country. I first advised government back in the early days of Gordon Brown on the issues of rural communities, particularly housing and economic development, and I've continued to work with them on planning reforms, which are primarily about better engaging local communities and not just pioneering some of the ideas that became neighbourhood planning, but also the importance of listening a little more to what people say, helping that then delivers the housing that's needed. If you force things on people, if you ignore their concerns, if you don't engage with them, my view is that, of course, they'll put up the barriers. But if you do engage with communities, if you talk with them about their needs, actually they become very responsive. And all of you know that. You know that because you're parish councillors, you know that because you live in rural communities. In many cases, you live in places that are engaged, and you see, as well as I do, how people respond positively to that. And I have to say, in that context, I think actually, particularly with planning, we've come an enormously long way in the right direction in many respects over recent years. Not all perfect, not all how we would want it to be, but I think we should nonetheless acknowledge that parishes and town councils have been enormously empowered by some of the changes that have taken place, and that's why I'm a big advocate of neighbourhood planning in particular. Before I talk a little bit more in detail about that, though, can I also say that it's not just an honour to be asked to be your president, it's also a bit of work, and what I've been discussing with the National Association is the ways in which I may be able to assist directly. I have spoken a number of times in debates on the Housing and Planning Bill on issues that are of concern to NALC and to many parish councils across the country, and that will continue. But I have a particular role in working with DCLG and other government departments around planning matters. It's a big part of what I do behind the scenes, and obviously my role with NALC will allow me to understand the concerns that you have and then represent those, I hope, even more effectively. But today is primarily about you representing things, and I just want to touch on a few of the things that you may want to raise with MPs and others during the day. There's the issue of making sure that as community representatives you are properly engaged in all of the statutory consultation processes that take place. I have to say, as chair of the neighbourhood plan steering group, I also think it's a welcome move that those steering groups are engaged too, because there isn't always a complete join-up between the consultation with the parish and the consultation with the neighbourhood steering group, even though they're directly linked. And I've experienced myself the frustration of planning matters coming through whilst in the course of neighbourhood plan process, which were actually in contradiction with the things that we were planning to write. And that's not a great place to be, so I think it's really important that does happen. But we have some bigger issues talking about neighbourhood planning to raise today too. The changes that are taking place with right to buy and the implicit changes in what might be delivered on exception sites, and whether that will be in perpetuity for the community, raise enormous concerns for me. If you go back to the Living Working Countryside review I did for the Labour government, and I should make it clear I've done reviews for the subsequent governments too, what I talked about was empowering parish councils to deliver within their community, so that the local planning authority wouldn't be a block to a community doing the right thing. that focused particularly on, in perpetuity, affordable housing to meet the needs of rural communities, particularly for those who work in rural areas but earn very low earnings. When I first started that review, I kept being told that that wage levels in many rural communities are very high. I'm glad you laughed, because I was able to prove them wrong. It is the case that for those who commute into the city with big professional jobs, the incomes can be high. So within the village, the average income may be high. But actually, rural wages, for those who actually work within rural communities, right across England, are about 20% below the national average. We all know that from our experience, but I was able to show it. So the question wasn't, what are the earnings of the people who live in the village? My question was, what are the earnings of the people who work in the village? And can they afford to live there? And then I looked at the kind of places that I represented in my own part of the world, in Cornwall, and you found in St Agnes, the girl who worked in the village shop but lived in the back of a van because she couldn't afford anywhere to live, who was born and brought up in the village but priced out of it. The farmer who'd moved from livestock to arable because he had not been able to find accommodation for a herdsman anywhere within 30 miles of the farm. The handyman who serviced much of the Roseland Peninsula, the guy that mended your window, fixed the leak in the roof, very well known, worked there for years, was able to maintain his living, but when his accommodation that he rented was sold to someone who decided to turn it into a holiday let, he wasn't able to find any accommodation in the area which he worked, and he had to move away. And they actually, one of the parish councils has actually worked with him to try and identify a single property that was available for long-term rent, as apart from the holiday market, and had been unable to find anything. Not anything available, just anything in that popular holiday location. So changes that take away the ability of communities to decide the form of housing and to make it in perpetuity for people, I think will be disastrous. Not just because there's an absolute need for this, but also because I think it's a total breach of faith with the principle of exception sites and of neighbourhood planning in both its current and its older forms of a community coming together, finding a willing landowner who's prepared to let a site come forward at low cost, working with the community to agree the appropriate location for that, but making a promise both to the landowner who sacrificed value, if it could otherwise be open to market housing, and to breach a promise to the community who may well have actually seen some houses built that in an ideal world they wouldn't have seen built, but they accept the need in that community. That breach of faith in then selling those homes, if that happens, or changing the terms on which we can restrict what happens to those homes in future and with certainty make sure that they are in perpetuity. In my view, that will actually mean that fewer sites are brought forward, because communities won't do it if they don't feel they have that control, neither will landowners. So I think it's a self-defeating policy, and that's what I've been speaking about in the Commons and in the Lords, and I would urge you to make that case to MPs, because we will see the Lords defend those principles. It will go back to the Commons, and there is an opportunity for it to turn from a ping-pong fight in which the government just tries to push through what it wants, to actually an intelligent conversation which can reconcile what the government has promised in its manifesto with what rural and smaller communities know that they need. And in the process of getting a proper solution, we will actually, I think, deliver more homes, because people will have faith that what is delivered will actually be about meeting local needs. I also think that an issue that has been of long-standing interest to NALC, and something which I have championed from the earliest days in this place rather than in the other place, has been the right of local communities to appeal where they don't believe a development is the right thing. But I have to say, I think that to have any chance of that being a realistic proposition, we need to be realistic about the circumstances. I've always said that it should be in circumstances where the local authority plan that has gone through all the proper processes is being ignored. If it's within the plan, and that plan's gone through the proper process, then fair enough. But if it is against the plan and consultation, that's where I believe parishes should have an ability to say, actually, that needs to be reviewed. And in the context of neighbourhood planning, I think that it is absolutely critical that if a neighbourhood plan is put in place, but then the local planning authority decides to approve something against that local plan, which they are empowered to do, that there should be some way in which the community that has gone through the grief of creating that neighbourhood plan is able to challenge it. So I think that in creating neighbourhood planning, the government has created irrefutably the basis for a right to appeal where that neighbourhood plan is ignored. Otherwise, in due course, faith in the neighbourhood planning process will dissolve, and if it dissolves, who on earth is going to go through the process of creating one? Which brings me to neighbourhood planning in a little more detail. A year and a half ago, I was asked by my parish council, Roach Parish Council, if I would be prepared to chair a steering group to create our neighbourhood plan. I clearly was not stupid enough to say yes. I said no. I said I was very happy to advise, but it was a really long and difficult job and it would be much more fitting for someone else. Then twisted my arm, and after a lot of twisting and having to acknowledge that given my background I probably could bring something to the process, I rather stupidly seem to have signed on the dotted line. Can't quite recall it, may have involved a few drinks, not quite sure. But anyway, here I am as chair of my neighbourhood plan steering group. When I took it on, I thought to myself, well, as the architect of many of these ideas, and as someone who's been working closely in national planning policy, these people who talked about it taking 2 or 3 years, you know, obviously if you didn't know much about it that might be the case, but I thought I could just get it through, let's get this done, let's get it sorted. Village under quite a lot of threats, lots to do with it. Year and a half on, I'm wiser, greyer, a little more worn down. And I do feel that all of that said, the tremendous support I've had from Cornwall, the tremendous support I've actually had from locality, because we're a poor community with a neighbourhood plan that will deliver growth, so we've actually been able to get extra levels of support and funding as a result. We've just about got through, and I think we've done blooming well if we, I hope, will be submitting in a week or so, although supporting documents might take rather longer than I thought to deliver. But the referendum is still, you know, we'll be well towards the end of this year, even if things go well. So this is a very long process, a very difficult process, and I am absolutely clear that I could not have delivered what we have delivered if we hadn't had substantial funding and practical support. Not the levels of support that some parishes have had, but nonetheless substantial, particularly when it became clear we needed both a strategic environmental appraisal and then got challenged by Natural England for that lack of a habitats regulations appraisal, and we had to get ACON to do both the SEA and then screening for the HRA. These are not cheap things to be done, and in a very small parish, not something the parish really could have afforded to do itself. Not all neighbourhood plans get that level of support. They did tell me at the start we could do the sustainability appraisal for ourselves. I thought, no, that can't be too hard. I've seen them done. That was pretty difficult too, so ACON did that as part of the SEA process. These levels of support are absolutely critical. And my view is that we should be saying neighbourhood planning is a revolutionary tool for community engagement that is consistently delivering more than would have happened without neighbourhood planning, contrary to what lots of people thought. Certainly in my own community, it will deliver transformatory change to the community if we are successful, but it will also deliver more growth when we are strictly required to provide. Precisely because we're going to use growth to buy the things that we want. In our case, getting the traffic out of the village. Very, very heavy HGV use right through the village. So the community has worked all that through and thought, yes, we can accept some development we might not like if it can change the community for the better. If we can get, in our case, an increase in school because children are being bussed out who can't get there. If we can get the pavements to make the road safer, which is unpavemented link to the railway station, heavily walked, heavily trafficked by big lorries, fatalities waiting to happen, and in fact already a very bad accident track record. So we can deliver change, we can involve the community really successfully. We have engaged enormously with the community, 1,400 homes, over 400 responses to the final consultation. Door-to-door leaflet, not paying their postage, just getting them to drop the leaflet in at the post office and the GP surgery. This changes that neighbourhood planning can deliver are enormous, and I urge any of you who aren't already engaged in it to do it, but to do it recognising how hard it is, and therefore use today to make the case for much better support, because frankly there isn't enough support available. We've been relatively fortunate, but I still say we needed more officer time and more engagement, and we've had exceptional levels of officer time and engagement. And I've had, through my contact, a whole lot of free support as well, not least free support from the QC. And there ain't many QCs, retired or otherwise, living in Roach in the China Clay District of Cornwall, I can tell you that. So you need to use those, but you can't rely on them. And government is just getting something at the moment without paying for it, bluntly. They need to pay more for it. Yep. To all intents and purposes, we are doing most of what is required in a local plan process, but without the resources. It may be a smaller area, but it doesn't make it that much easier to do. And it is a vital part, moving forward, I believe, of the planning process. So right to appeal, consultations, call for neighbourhood planning, and tackle those issues around in perpetuity affordable housing for local people and the housing bill, because those issues are right live now. Defeats last night for the government. I was involved in those debates, but we need the Commons to accept some changes, or ministers to accept some changes. Finally, I've also been involved with working through something that was announced in the budget that's been very little covered. And that is quite a big issue, which is I have been raising the question of why we do development in the way that we do. For some years now, really since the early 1980s, we have been planning on the basis of sequential development. So whether it's a village or a town, we've added little housing estates around the edge. And every time there's a battle, people say it'll be terrible, it'll be lots of little rabbit hutches with no garden to swing a cat in, there'll probably very small rooms, but no proper reflection of the style of the place or the community. The houses probably will have a large number of bathrooms. For some reason that seems to be what sells. But I'm not quite sure what that came. I've never lived in a house with a large number of bathrooms, but but also that has two hugely negative consequences. One, it means that it is entirely predictable where development will go. And although we fight the battles as if they're the last one, there's always another one after that. So people not only go, there, I told you it would be horrible, but then they're asked to do another one. So they're told, but we were told that these houses would meet our need. Oh, no, that was only this need. Now there'll be another one, and another one, and another one. And we ring our wonderful historic communities with bland estates of poor quality housing that don't actually meet the needs of the people who live within them, and are unbelievably costly. And they're unbelievably costly because we're not freeing actually up enough land because we hate what's delivered, so of course we resist it, but also because it's entirely predictable where the development will take place. So the landowners effectively hold us to ransom on the costs. And in doing that, that leaves us struggling to provide the services, the GP surgery, the school, the parks, the gardens, the things that make a great place get priced out. And even the promises they make early on are then not delivered because they say, oh, but it's unviable.
Yeah.
And you see, and a number of occasions around me, we've had parishes fighting the battle where play areas have been promised, the fencing's up, but the play areas never put in, and then they come back with an application to build the houses on it. So our planning system delivers poor quality housing at very high cost in places that actually have the maximum detrimental impact on our historic communities. If you go back to the deal that was done when we introduced planning and when we introduced the green belts, actually it was a completely different deal. It was firstly to use planning to say, don't have endless sprawl around your existing communities. In fact, the green belt was meant to be a very narrow thing, not huge areas of the country, but a narrow thing, which the public had right to access. So it was more than just protecting against development. It was going to be that you could walk your dogs there and ride your horses there, go and walk and blackberry pick, and there would be public access to the countryside. That didn't happen. It became golf courses and private pony meadows. But the flip side was actually that was a period when we needed a lot of housing. Post-war, we needed to regenerate our town centres, and the green belt helped do that by focusing development within the centre. That's the brownfield bit. But it also said, and we will create wonderful new communities. Garden villages, garden towns. And we will do that because we don't want to ruin our existing villages and towns, but we do want to provide housing for people who need it. And I have been urging government to reflect that when the NIMBY says they don't want building in their backyard, isn't that precisely why we have Hyde Park? Because royalty wanted to hunt behind the palace. It's why we've got Lambeth Park across the road, because the bishop didn't want housing peering into his bathroom. But what we created was wonderful green spaces that the community used, and beyond them, we delivered the housing that people needed to live in. Well, that option is now being brought forward by the government. They've made those announcements on budget day. It's very low-key, because it's going to be entirely in the hands of communities and local planning authorities. They can go down and continue down the route of endless sequential development, or they can choose to create a new supplement. And that creation of a new supplement will allow the schools and the hospitals and the shops, and I don't just mean the crinkly shirt for Tesco's, I mean little shops, for someone to run a grocer's or a butcher's and not pay a lot of rent, because it will capture most of the land value. So instead of the landowner going from a field that's worth £1,500 an acre or £5,000 an acre for agriculture with no possibility of development, they will get a better farm and a better house, and the people who live there can be compensated for the development too. But the capture of the land, most of the land value, will mean that nobody gets a helicopter and a place in Barbados, but the community gets the GP surgery and the school and the shops that it needs. I think that's a really revolutionary change. For all of you, it's an option to think about. It will mean for some places that are currently purely rural, there'd be a new town or village. But by capturing the value, it can be a wonderful town or village. And we know we can do it because people have been making them for centuries and centuries. It will have the finance to do it. It won't be at taxpayer expense. But it will allow us to decide, if we wish, to protect our existing communities from that endless, bland estate which rewards people with an island in the Canaries or whatever it is, and as I said, the helicopter and the Rolls Royce, but fails to deliver great places to live and actually destroys the great places we already live in. I think it's worth taking that debate forward in due course. Given the announcements that will be made, it will be something I think many areas are debating, and something that you should be aware of. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say. That's rather more time than I was meant to speak for. I apologise. That's what presidents do, because no one dare say otherwise. You know. But as you get used to me, I'm sure you'll be tapping your watches in a more obvious way. Very happy to answer any questions if we've got time for that. But can I just say again, thank you so much for this role. I will continue to argue for the things I believe in, particularly around rural communities, but I will add to that, taking the opportunity to make sure that the voice of local councils is heard even more powerfully in Parliament.